So the Premier League have already set a new summer transfer record, exceeding last summer's 1.92 billion, breaking through the £2 billion barrier for the first time. It is quite remarkable. The Premier League leads away, £2.1 billion spent, and it's not done yet. It's not done yet. Who comes in at second? The new kids on the block, you guessed it, the Saudis. They've already spent £728 million in this window. And then a long way behind them, Serie A and the Bundesliga. Even further behind them, Liga, and way behind everybody else, La Liga. So the Premier League and the Saudis lead the way by considerable distance. What do these figures, Simon, tell us about the global landscape of football? Where's this going?
Well, put aside the Saudi situation, because we know what that is. We know that they are trying to build a league. They have an appetite for it, their motivations, and why the trigger point is now. I don't know, maybe the World Cup and in another part of the Middle East drove them to start to say, well, hang on a second, we're not getting left behind. So you take the 720...
We can't dismiss them, though.
I don't dismiss them. But
you just said put aside the Saudis for now.
But I put aside...
You can't. They're in town.
But I put it... Yeah, because it's a new revenue stream that incorporates into the argument the levels of spend across the marketplace. You've got outliers like Chelsea. I mean, what have they spent in this transfer window? 300 million again? So Chelsea and their propensity to spend in the fashion that they have, because you've got a different sort of ownership thought process going on with Todd Bowley, has predominantly the reasons why transfer spend records are being broken now, because Chelsea are the ones that are creating that. If Chelsea spent their customary 150 million quid, we'd be in the territory of not breaking records, not breaking 2 billion quid, and staying in the sort of territory where it's been for the last few years. So what it tells you is that there is a lot of money in and around football going into transfer fees. I'd be very interested to see what the statistics were like in terms of the increase in wages against the transfer fee spend. But it tells you that the Premier League is still the dominant force because it's got the dominant broadcast deal. When we talk about the force of the Saudis, well, this is their moment to make their mark. This is their time.
Yeah, but you get the impression they've only just started.
Well, maybe. We'll see. We will see. We'll see how the landscape, when we start to see this massive interest in the Saudi Pro League that diminishes the moment the transfer window turns off.
Yeah, but Simon, be honest with me. Say 3 or 4 months ago, did you honestly think for one moment we'd be talking about Saudi Arabia spending 728 million quid in the summer transfer window? They weren't even in the conversation.
I didn't have any figures in my mind of what they spent, but what I did hear from them was they were going to make their league very aggressive and they were going to try and buy their way into football. And so from the standing start position, given the fact that they have no parameters, if you want to turn it on its head, right, let's do it another way. They have no governance, no constraints, no financial obligations, and no lack of resources. So I don't actually think spending 728 million quid is as huge a bit of news as we would like to make it for the purpose of this discussion, because they're starting from a very different position with a very different set of agendas, with a very different set of social economics, with a very different set of governance. So big deal. They spent a third of the Premier League. They're talking about spending 17
will you be
billion.
saying big deal when they lead the way in the Christmas window?
Well,
when they've outspent the Premier League.
Well, you mean in January when we see them being,
in January
when we see all the offcasts that the Premier League clubs don't want, that they'd be glad to get rid of, being chucked out to the boneyard of Saudi. Fantastic. If it's a dumping ground for talent that we don't want, and if it's going to help if you're going to pay 120, 130 million pounds for Mo Salah at 31 years of age, then you are actually by effect helping the Premier League to strengthen itself, because you're giving
unlike
it
the
more
Premier
revenue.
League, they're doing this without a TV deal.
But they're doing it by a different set of governance. They don't need... The TV deal underpins the ecosystem of the Premier League, of Serie A, of La Liga, but it doesn't underpin Saudi football. What underpins Saudi football is oil and their desire to make themselves utilise football as a gateway for whatever other agendas they may or may not have.
You didn't think there'd be a record spend in this window? 1.92 billion was the previous record in this summer window.
I was looking
and now we're well over 2 billion.
Yeah, I was looking at my projections, which were about 1.85, because I didn't think Chelsea would spend more than 200 million quid. And the fact they've spent more than 300 million quid takes me into the space where I'm wrong, and Alex and you guys were right about what their spend was going to be in terms of the Premier League was going to go for another record.
Is this a trend?
I don't think it is a trend. I think if you're looking at what's happening with FFP and the governance around it and the changing parameters that they're going to have to incorporate into their thinking with the reduction of the percentage of turnover, which includes player transfer amortization from 90% to 70%, I don't see how it can unless there's an opportunity to grow their revenues in other areas. Now, for Chelsea, we've had this debate, we've had it with various people about their ability to compete with financial fair play at knocking at their door and their ability to overcome it. Some people make the case that they are prepared to break the financial fair play obligation on the basis they'll price it into their business plan. Well, not if their consequences are greater than they currently are at this moment in time, which is a financial penalty. So
there's Paul, Chelsea fan Paul, is saying, Simon, stop picking on Chelsea. They're not the top in net spend in this window. Arsenal are.
Well, this is the question. Yes, but yeah, okay. But yeah, I'm not picking on Chelsea. We're talking about the fact that Chelsea, in fact, I'm the last person to have picked on Chelsea because I'm the one that's made the argument to defend Chelsea repeatedly, that Todd Bowley knows what he's doing and that ultimately they'll be able to survive financial fair play and they're not breaching the system. So the fact that I've made the observation that Chelsea are spending a lot of money and they've got the balance perhaps better by selling all their academy talent to be able to manage their profit and loss scenarios isn't picking on someone. It's just pointing out something that's bloody clear for everyone to see, except those that don't want to have it pointed out to them. And the interesting thing for me would be, and I don't have the statistic, and I think Alex may be able to give it to me at some point, is the net spend. Because last year we had a £1.9 billion spend, but I'm willing to wager you that the net spend of clubs will be less this year than it was last year, because it's one thing, the top line number, how much are we punting out, how much is this money going around in a circle, and how much of it is net spend on the balance sheet of football clubs. But I'm not in your camp. I don't care about this Saudi situation.
But you've got to care about them.
I genuinely don't. I think that this argument that you're going to build a league on the basis of individual players is fool's paradise. Football clubs and the tribalism that goes behind football clubs are the driving factors. You can take a few footballers and you can make the case that the next generation of fans follow players, but only a certain type of player. There's only a few of them. There's a handful of them. There's the Messis and the Ronaldos and the Neymars and the Mbappes of the world. The rest of them, they don't have that relationship with fans in the way that these superstars do. So if you think you're going to build a league around a bunch of mercenaries that are currently going for one thing and one thing only, the money, and you're going to make that league competitive against the world order of football, I think you're away with yourself. And I don't care how people think that's unrealistic and how people think that's naive because the Saudis can do whatever they want because they've got the resources to do that. If that were the case, then there would be a lot of other things in the world order that have been changed by Middle Eastern money that hasn't.
But I say again, though, you could not have expected, no one could have expected Saudi Arabia to be the second biggest spenders in the summer transfer window.
So let's get this right.
Weeks ago, you could have named a club in Saudi Arabia.
We're embarking on a sort of tipping our cap to the profligacy and the ridiculousness of their transfer policy.
You've got to tip your cap to them. They're second in spend.
I don't tip my cap to. Is it good spend? Is it? Have they spent well? Because we're quite happy to turn around and say that Todd Bowley's a buffoon for overpaying left, right and centre. Aren't these guys doing precisely that? There's nothing admirable about getting an average Premier League footballer and giving him £15 million a year.
Well, let me turn it on its head. The £2.1 million spend by the Premier League, billion. Is that admirable?
It's comparable to the relative value.
Is it admirable?
To the relative value, it's the marketing cost of a £5-6 billion a year league. What's a Saudi league worth? Sod all. It's worth sod all. No, it's not admirable. It's comparable. I said, Luke. So get your little bit out.
But is it admirable?
It's a cost of business. In the Premier, no, I don't think it's admirable. I think transfer fees are obscene. But if you look at it and say you've got a £5 billion industry spending £2 billion on transfer fees, and the average transfer fee is the average value of that is depreciating. So it's costing the Premier League $400 million a year in depreciation. So less than 10% of its turnover is going in, because you buy a footballer for £2 billion. You buy £2 billion worth of footballers. On day one, all you've done is exchange cash for a footballer. So the value's still there. What you're actually losing is £400 million a year. So £400 million a year in losses on transfer fees against a £5 billion revenue generation. I don't think that's bad. What's the Saudi comparison? Sod all.
You didn't think, though, for one moment, the Premier League spend would go through $2 billion in this window,
no,
did you?
I didn't think this year that we would get to $2 billion. And the reasons why I didn't think we'd get to $2 billion is because I didn't think Chelsea would spend another 300 million quid. If Chelsea had spent what I thought they would spend, which is 150 million quid, we'd be beneath $2 billion. And I'd be half right.
Comparable. Admirable.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.